Okay, we need to talk about that Mike Tyson Super Bowl ad because it was more than just offensive. It was actively harmful, and it will drive people further into obesity, something that I will prove to you by the end of this video. And before we go any further, for anyone unfamiliar with my content, I'm a professional digital strategist and communicator of nearly 20 years, a huge percentage of which has been spent doing messaging around health and healthcare, including running digital communication for Medicaid in the state of Oklahoma. In other words, this is my literal area of expertise. And that Mike Tyson commercial pissed me off so much that I literally had to wait another 24 hours before making this video, because when I tried to make it yesterday, I would just start yelling within 30 seconds of pushing record. So first, let's break down the ad itself and look at who exactly is behind its creation. So in case you haven't seen it, here's just a small snippet of the commercial itself.
I was so fat and nasty, I would eat anything. I was like 345 pounds, a quart of ice cream every hour. I had so much self-hate when I was like that. I just wanted to kill myself.
Gross. So this ad was funded by a brand new nonprofit called the Maha Center, which appears to have suddenly appeared online as an organization on Friday, February 6th, less than 48 hours before the Super Bowl. The Maha Center was founded by billionaire RFK Jr. supporter Tony Lyons. Tony Lyons became a billionaire on the back of running Skyhorse Publishing, an independent publisher that he inherited from his daddy, which is best known for publishing books that are too controversial for other, better, more reputable publishers to want anything to do with them. For example, they're the who agreed to publish Woody Allen's memoir, which he used to call the former child victim of his many crimes a liar. So the commercial was paid for by an but it turns out it was also directed by an specifically this Brent Ratner, a predator whose most recent work was directing the Melania film. Yeah. And notice how I didn't at any point mention there being anyone with a background or expertise in public health communication being involved in the creation of this commercial. Yeah, that's because there wasn't. And I'm stating that as a fact because as someone who actually does have both a background and expertise in public health communication, I can say with absolute certainty that there were no actual experts in this kind of communication involved anywhere in the process. Because this commercial is straight up the gold standard of what not to do when communicating with the public about their health. Not only does it violate every best practice in existence, it straight up works against their stated goal of improving people's health-related behaviors and lowering the obesity rate. I would bet every single penny to my name that in 5 years' time, if researchers were to study the impact of this commercial, they would almost certainly find evidence that it increased obesity rates. And I say almost certainly, not because I'm unsure about that, but because I'm being generous enough to give them like a 1% chance that it might, best case scenario, have a neutral impact. But just to be extra clear, there is no world in which there is even a smidge of a possibility that that commercial will have a positive impact on obesity rates. 0% chance. If I were teaching a course on public health messaging, I would not only give any student who turned in a commercial like this a 0, I would kick them out of my class entirely. That's how bad that commercial is. There is a massive body of evidence, pun intended, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that not only does shame-based messaging not work in public health, shame-based messaging that is centered around weight stigma specifically causes disordered eating, decreases physical activity, and it causes both healthcare avoidance and weight gain. And as a result, that shame the fatty style messaging literally increases mortality rates. It kills fat people. It doesn't make them thinner. And you want to know what population is most impacted by the negative outcomes of that kind of messaging? Children. 10 years from now, I guarantee there will be teenagers and young adults who can trace the origin of their ED and lifelong toxic relationship with food, diet, and exercise back to this very commercial. I guarantee it. And I already know that there will be people in my comments arguing that shame the fatty is effective and that it isn't harmful, and worst of all, that it is being done out of love. So I just want to proactively say to those people, shut the up. You don't know what you're talking about, and it's embarrassing that you're trying to argue with a literal expert. What is it that people like you always say? Oh, that's right. Facts don't care about your feelings, right? So I don't have to give a about whatever self-esteem issue it is that you have that makes you so desperate to feel superior to fat people, but that's your problem to work out, not theirs, and certainly not mine. Stop being such a loser, work on whatever fundamental brokenness you have inside of you, and leave fat people the alone. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that rude of me to shame a complete stranger for their behavior like that? Interesting. But in all seriousness, to those people, I would just point out that not only have there been numerous research studies done on this topic, there have also been multiple laboratory experiments that proved the same exact thing. And this is important because I know that the primary cop-out that fat shamers always jump to in their defense of fat shaming is that fat people lie and overeat in private. So any research study based on even a small percentage of self-reported data from fat people cannot be trusted because fatties cannot be trusted, right? Wrong. Laboratory experiments in which study participants are exposed to weight stigma and fat shaming messaging have shown time and time again that not only did the study participants' eating increase and their self-regulation decrease as a result of exposure to weight stigma, their literal cortisol levels, you know, the hormone that causes obesity, would spike as a result of that weight stigma. And that spike was particularly pronounced for participants who either were overweight or even just perceived themselves as overweight. When you fat shame someone and say like was in that Mike Tyson commercial, you are doing the equivalent of injecting them with a fatty serum. Do you understand that? You are causing massive spikes in their cortisol levels that they have zero control over. You did that to them. They did not. You did. You are to blame in that situation. But bringing it back to the commercial and its creators, whenever a wealthy person is willing to drop $8 million on a commercial, but isn't willing to spend a little bit more money to make sure that that commercial is actually capable of accomplishing their stated goal, the first thing you should do is question whether they're even telling you the truth about what their goal actually is. Because billionaires are a lot of things, many of which would get me kicked off of here entirely if I named them out loud, but most of them are not completely stupid, especially when it relates to their money. Spending $8 million on an anti-obesity commercial that is more likely to make people more obese would be a very stupid thing to do with his money. And this last bit is speculation on my part, so please just know that what I say next, I'm not asserting as a statement of fact, but I've thought long and hard over the last 48 hours about what the possible motivations for this commercial could be. And from my perspective, I think it could be one of two things, or a combination of the two. First, I think that it very much benefits the right to perpetuate the narrative of personal responsibility, especially when they have recently passed legislation that will negatively impact the health of millions of Americans. If they can convince you that everything bad that happens to your neighbor's health is solely the result of his bad choices, all while simultaneously convincing your neighbor of the same thing about you, they can make it a lot harder for we the people to hold them responsible for damaging our healthcare system even further and making all of us less healthy in the process. It benefits them when we zero in on judging each other's choices rather than work together to address the systemic problems that are making all of us sick. Which brings me to my second possible motivation. A lot of those systemic problems are the result of capitalism and the greed of the 1%. They don't want you to look at the single mom stuck working 2 full-time jobs to keep food on the table and rent paid and have the instinct to help her by challenging the system that requires that she work herself into an early grave just to get by in the first place. They profit off of that system, after all. They want you to look at how fat she is and just assume that she's lazy, because then you'll be blinded to just how hard she's working and how unfair it is to expect someone to have to work that hard just to stay alive. But addressing the systemic causes of obesity would also mean acknowledging that that single mom is fat in part because she has to eat supper in the car every day as she drives from one job to the other. It would mean acknowledging that food and farm subsidies have made it much more affordable for her to keep her children's bellies full off of ultra-processed food because fresh produce is expensive and it goes bad faster than she has time to deal with. It would mean acknowledging that expecting generation after generation to work 80 hours a week means losing the skills that previously would have been passed down from one generation to the next, because mom and dad are stuck at their second and third jobs and don't have time to teach their children how to cook healthy meals, which means their children don't grow up knowing how to cook healthy meals. So no, I do not think that that commercial was meant to motivate you to lose weight. I think it was meant to motivate you to blame how sick our nation has become on yourself, on your neighbor, and on every single person in this country other than the folks at the top.